Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The moment she leaned against my doorframe, the air between us shifted, thick with a tension that made my chest tighten. Her gaze held me captive, equal parts vulnerability and defiance, and for a heartbeat, I wondered if the world had narrowed down to just the space between us. She pressed herself against the wood, not hiding, yet almost daring me to look away. "You weren't supposed to see me like this, but don't look away," she whispered, and it was as if the room itself was holding its breath. The words hung between us, fragile but incendiary, igniting memories I hadn't dared revisit and feelings I had tried to bury. I could feel the pulse of hesitation in her movements, a subtle curve of her shoulder, the faint brush of her hand against her own neck, and it all screamed of things unsaid. We had always danced around this: friendship, proximity, the unacknowledged spark, but now it was raw, undeniable, like a live wire crackling with forbidden energy. I wanted to speak, to close the distance, yet something restrained me. Perhaps it was the fear of crossing a line neither of us were ready to define. Or maybe it was the thrill of the moment itself, suspended in a delicious ambiguity. Her eyes lingered on mine, searching, almost pleading. And though every instinct screamed at me to step back, part of me was magnetized, drawn to her like gravity itself had conspired to pull us closer. We were strangers who knew each other too well, and well enough to recognize that this instant, this charged, impossible instant, would leave a mark neither of us could erase. Time seemed to fold inward, the ordinary sounds of the world fading until it was only us, only the tremor in her voice and the unspoken question that hovered between us. Then she shifted slightly, a whisper of a smile teasing the corners of her lips, and stepped back just enough to create a space, a pause, a silent invitation. And I realized that everything we'd avoided, every hidden thought and fleeting glance, was about to collide. My heart raced as the moment stretched, a fragile tension dangling above us like a storm ready to break. And just like that, she left me suspended, wondering which way we would fall. Toward what was safe, or into the fire waiting behind her eyes. She didn't move, but the subtle tilt of her head, the way her fingers grazed the doorframe, spoke volumes. I swallowed, my own hands itching to reach out, yet frozen by an invisible barrier neither of us wanted to name. The air between us felt like it had its own weight, heavy with unspoken confessions, the kind that hovered just beyond our lips. Every glance was deliberate, every pause in our conversation a brush of electricity. "I didn't expect to see you tonight," I said finally, my voice rougher than I intended. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes, which were trained solely on me, searching, questioning, teasing. The subtle curve of her mouth suggested mischief, but her stance hinted at vulnerability. It was a contradiction I could feel deep in my chest. She took a step closer, careful, measured, yet close enough that the space between us shivered with tension. "Sometimes," she murmured, her voice just above a whisper, "expectations aren't everything." The words were soft, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. My heartbeat picked up, hammering like I'd just run a mile. Every instinct told me to close the gap, yet something, our history, our secrets, the invisible line we weren't ready to cross, kept me rooted. A laugh escaped her, light and sudden, breaking the silence in the most tantalizing way. It was a sound that had always unsettled me, a mixture of familiarity and danger, like stepping onto ice that might hold or break. Her gaze flickered to my hand, then back to my eyes, and in that moment, the universe seemed to condense into something fragile, potent, and entirely ours. Time slowed. A faint brush of her arm against mine as she adjusted her stance made my pulse spike. The moment was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it left me acutely aware of every inch of space, every subtle motion. I wanted to ask the questions my mind kept circling around. About us, about what this meant, but my voice refused to obey. Instead, we lingered in silence, a shared tension thick enough to taste, our unspoken thoughts heavier than any words could convey. She stepped back finally, just enough to restore the fragile boundary between us, yet left the air charged, humming with possibility. And I realized we were suspended in this delicate balance. Wanting, resisting, aching, all at once. And somehow, that uncertainty, that unspoken desire, was the most intimate connection we'd ever shared. The silence between us thickened, almost tangible, as if the room itself recognized the weight of everything left unsaid. I wanted to step closer, to bridge the gap, but the walls she and I had built over the years loomed larger than the desire thrumming through my veins. There were rules, past mistakes, unspoken promises, and perhaps the faintest echo of fear. And yet, despite it all, the pull toward her was undeniable, magnetic in a way that made rational thought feel futile. Her fingers brushed mine accidentally, or so we both claimed, but it was enough to send a shiver racing up my arm. The contact was fleeting, yet the electricity lingered, making the air between us hum with unvoiced longing. She pulled back just slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the tension that neither of us dared fully name. My throat tightened, my heart pounding in synchrony with the silent rhythm we were caught in. "You're different tonight," I murmured, words tasting of more than observation. She tilted her head, a half-smile curving her lips, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a secret locked away that both intrigued and tormented me. "Maybe I just show different parts of myself to certain people," she replied softly, the honesty buried in her voice leaving more unsaid than said. The room seemed to shrink around us. Every subtle movement, her shift in stance, the flicker of her gaze, the brush of her hair against her shoulder, felt amplified. The desire wasn't just physical. It was the tension of all the things we'd hidden from each other, the history that bound us, the unspoken questions neither of us had answers for. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, to finally let the moment break free from restraint, but something, perhaps the weight of our own hearts, stopped me. Her eyes lingered on mine, searching, questioning, daring me to act. And in that instant, the world outside ceased to exist. A breath, a heartbeat, a nearly touch. Everything was charged with what could be, what might never be. And then, as if to preserve the fragile balance, she stepped back, creating space again, leaving the tension suspended like a held note in a song neither of us wanted to end. We stood there, two people connected by history, desire, and restraint, caught in a storm of longing that neither words nor gestures could fully express. And yet, in that charged silence, we knew one truth. This moment, fragile and fleeting, would linger in both our hearts long after the room returned to stillness. The space between us felt alive, as if every molecule in the room were holding its breath. I could feel her presence like a current running along my skin, subtle yet undeniable, pulling me closer with every heartbeat. Her eyes, wide and searching, held a question I could not answer, yet one I desperately wanted to. The tension had grown unbearable, a living thing, vibrating in sync with the quiet rhythm of our breaths. "I can't. I don't know if I should," I faltered, the words catching in my throat. She took a step forward, just enough to erase half the distance, and the faintest brush of her arm against mine sent a jolt through me. Her fingers twitched almost instinctively, like they wanted to find mine, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the moment stretch, fragile and dangerous, suspended between us. Her voice dropped to a whisper, soft and intimate, carrying the weight of everything we had avoided. "Why do we always stop? Right before?" she murmured, and it wasn't a question but a confession. The words landed heavily, echoing in my chest, stirring memories, regrets, and desires I had tried to contain. I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the part of her that wanted everything and feared losing it all, and I felt it mirrored in myself. A silence followed, thick, almost tangible, wrapping around us. Time slowed. The air between us shimmered with anticipation, as if the room itself had tuned into our unspoken conversation. Our shoulders almost touched, a whisper of heat radiating where the space dissolved. I could smell the faint scent of her hair, the subtle warmth of her skin, and it was intoxicating in a way that neither words nor logic could contain. Her gaze dropped to my lips for a fleeting second, a fleeting surrender, before she looked back into my eyes, holding my attention hostage. I leaned in slightly, just enough for our breaths to mingle, yet pulled back at the edge of a precipice neither of us wanted to cross yet. The moment was raw, poetic, a slow burn of desire and emotion, a crescendo that teased without release. And then she whispered again, almost to herself, almost to me, "I don't know how much longer I can," leaving the sentence hanging, uncompleted, charged with everything we had never said. The room held us in suspended tension, hearts racing, breaths caught, teetering on the edge of a moment that promised everything and demanded patience. The rain tapped gently against the window, a soft percussion that mirrored the rhythm of our hearts. The apartment was dimly lit, golden light spilling across the room in lazy pools, illuminating her face in a way that made every line, every expression, burn itself into my memory. The tension that had held us hostage all night now felt alive, breathing with us, pulsing in the air between us like electricity waiting for permission. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, our shoulders brushing in a way that left neither of us untouched. The slightest contact, the ghost of her fingertips along my arm, spoke more than any words ever could. Her breath mingled with mine, soft and steady, and I realized we had finally crossed the invisible threshold we'd skirted for so long. It was not the urgency of desire but the quiet surrender to something deeper, something we had denied ourselves for too long. Her eyes searched mine, luminous in the warm light, and I felt every unspoken thought, every confession we had withheld, flowing silently between us. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. Our bodies, leaning toward one another, whispered what our voices never could. A gentle tilt of her head, the brush of her hair against my cheek, the way her hand hovered near mine. It was all conversation, all acknowledgement, all release. I leaned slightly, and she mirrored me, the space between us dissolving into shared warmth. Her breath melted into mine, a delicate exhale that sent shivers through my spine. The rain outside grew heavier, but inside, there was a serenity, a suspended time where nothing existed except the two of us, our hearts beating in silent harmony. The soft glow of the room traced her silhouette, highlighting the elegance of every gesture, the subtle grace of every movement. There was no hurry. Each motion was deliberate, each pause a study in restraint and longing. Our bodies spoke the words we could not utter, confessions, promises, apologies, desires, all woven into the simple closeness of leaning, touching, breathing together. Every heartbeat, every brush of skin against skin, deepened the intimacy, creating a moment so tender it felt sacred. And then we simply stayed there, wrapped in the quiet storm of ourselves, letting the night witness the culmination of years of unspoken yearning. No words were needed. The world outside faded into rain and shadow. Inside, there was only the warmth of shared space, the poetry of emotion rendered in breaths and glances, and the exquisite tension of a love finally allowed to exist. It was the night we let go, the night we surrendered to what we had both wanted, feared, and denied. And in that surrender, the world felt infinite, suspended, and breathtaking. Our hearts finally in full dialogue, our souls quietly, irrevocably intertwined. The morning light slipped in through half-closed blinds, soft and unrelenting, painting the apartment in muted gold. Silence hung in the air, heavy with the remnants of the night, lingering like smoke that hadn't quite dispersed. We sat across from each other, bodies near yet worlds apart, both wrapped in the quiet aftermath of something too intense to name. My hands fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. Hers rested limply on her knees, fingers tracing invisible patterns on the fabric. Neither of us spoke at first. Words seemed too fragile to contain the weight of what had passed. There was warmth, yes, and a dizzying closeness, but also a tremor of uncertainty. Was it love? Was it longing untempered by reason? Or merely a moment of escape from lives we hadn't dared confront fully? Every glance, every heartbeat between us carried questions we were not ready to voice. She finally broke the silence, her voice low, almost afraid it might shatter the fragile equilibrium. I didn't expect. She trailed off, and I understood perfectly. We had crossed a line we didn't know we were guarding, and now the morning made it real. I reached for her hand instinctively, and she didn't pull away, but our fingers barely touched, a reminder of boundaries not yet fully erased. The quiet was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Startled, we both froze. She glanced at me, eyes wide, and I realized we weren't just alone with each other anymore. I opened the door to find a neighbor, a bouquet of flowers in hand, oblivious to the charged tension that had filled the room for hours. We exchanged polite smiles, an ordinary intrusion that felt strangely grounding after the intensity of the night. As the door closed, the apartment returned to its charged stillness. But something had shifted. The night had left more than warmth. It had left clarity. We weren't running anymore, not from desire, not from truth. And though questions still lingered, and though fear still whispered in the edges of our minds, the connection between us was undeniable, deeper than it had ever been. We sat back down, side by side now, hands brushing occasionally, breaths sinking in quiet harmony. Words remained unnecessary. The storm of emotions had passed, leaving a fragile, beautiful calm. A promise that even if the world pulled us apart, this night, this connection, would linger, ineffable and unbroken. The apartment was quiet now, the storm of the previous night replaced by a gentle calm that wrapped around us like a soft blanket. We sat side by side on the couch, shoulders brushing lightly, sharing the warmth of a connection neither of us had expected but both had longed for. Her head rested against my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rise and fall of her breath, a rhythm that mirrored my own. It was simple, yet profound, a quiet affirmation that we were here, together, in this fragile moment of peace. "I'm glad it happened," she whispered, eyes half closed, voice soft with relief and lingering emotion. I brushed a strand of hair from her face, letting my fingers linger just enough to feel the subtle shiver it caused. "Me too," I murmured. The words felt inadequate, yet perfect in their brevity. There was no need for grand declarations, no need for urgency. Everything we had been through, the tension, the longing, the near misses, had led to this clarity, this quiet intimacy that spoke louder than any confession ever could. Outside, the morning light shifted, casting a golden glow across the room. It touched her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the softness of her lips, and I felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't known was possible. We didn't need to say anything more. A gentle kiss on her forehead, a hand resting over hers, hearts choosing stillness over chaos. That was enough. The world beyond these walls could wait. And yet, even as the peace settled, a part of me knew that this night, this closeness, would leave a lasting imprint. If we were together, it would be a bond built on honesty, longing, and patience. If we parted ways, the memory would linger like perfume, subtle but unforgettable, shaping the way we moved through our days. Either way, the connection had changed us, made us more human, more aware, and more alive. We breathed together in silence, the weight of everything lifted, and the simplicity of this shared presence felt revolutionary. The story wasn't about the climax or the drama. It was about the gentle certainty that comes when hearts finally recognize what they have always known. If this story gave you goosebumps or made your heart race, don't keep it to yourself. Hit like to show your love, subscribe for more emotional, romantic stories that linger long after the screen goes dark, and share your thoughts in the comments. Did you feel the tension, the longing, the connection? Your story matters here. Red heart turn on notifications so you never miss a heartbeat of drama, romance, and emotional storytelling.